9 experienced hikers found dead, stripped to their underwear in sub-zero darkness. Their tent ripped open from the inside. The official verdict was vague. But the truth? The truth is buried in the snow. And one single detail still doesn't add up. And until today, no one can agree on what they were truly running from. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. It happened in the freezing, silent heart of the Ural Mountains in 1959. 9 young adventurers set out on a challenging trek. They were highly trained, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. Their journey should have been a triumph. Instead, it became a tomb. They vanished into the vast white emptiness. The search began. What rescuers eventually found wasn't a tragic accident. It was the scene of a terrifying, inexplicable panic. On February 2nd, 1959, the group set up their final camp on the slopes of Kolotsiakl, Mansi for Dead Mountain. The weather was brutal, but they were prepared. They pitched their tent on the ridge, tucked in for the night. They never woke up. When search teams arrived weeks later, the silence was overwhelming. Then they saw the tent. It was half buried, partially collapsed. But it wasn't the exterior that was damaged. The tent had been violently slashed open from the inside. That's when investigators noticed something impossible. The trekkers hadn't used the zipper. They had cut their way out, desperately. They had fled into a blizzard where temperatures plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius, the biggest shock. There were no signs of a struggle inside the camp. No evidence of intruders, human or animal. Following the faint trails in the snow, investigators found the first 2 bodies almost a mile away, near a cedar tree. They were Georgy Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Their hands were brutally cut. What happened next would confuse the world for decades. 3 more bodies were found between the tree and the tent, including Dyatlov himself, positioned as if trying to crawl back toward the camp. They died of hypothermia, an expected outcome for people stripped naked in the Arctic. But their deaths were not the strange part. The strangeness was why they had been stripped. 2 months later, the remaining 4 hikers were found hidden in a ravine, buried under 15 feet of snow. This is where the case transitions from tragic to terrifying. 3 of the 4 had sustained catastrophic injuries. Lyudmila Dubinina had missing eyes and her tongue was gone. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had severe skull damage. Alexander Kolovatov and Semyon Zolotaryov had broken ribs, as if crushed by an immense force. Injuries comparable to a high-speed car crash. But there's one detail that changes everything. The doctor who examined the bodies testified that the broken bones were caused by a force too strong for a human to inflict. The skin surrounding the fractures was completely undamaged. There was no external bruising. The final chilling piece of evidence. Tests showed high levels of radiation on the clothing of a few of the victims. A disturbing, invisible residue. The Soviet authorities closed the case quickly, concluding the hikers had died from an unknown compelling force. A statement that officially admitted their failure to explain the terrifying scene. The inexplicable facts gave birth to theories, some scientific, some terrifyingly dark. A slab avalanche, a sudden deep fracture in the snow, slid down the slope and partially buried the tent. The sound and pressure convinced the hikers their lives were in immediate danger, forcing them to slash their way out and flee. If an avalanche occurred, where was the evidence? The slope was not steep enough for a massive, catastrophic slide. Furthermore, investigators noted that the cuts in the tent were made by a knife, not the crushing weight of snow. And most critically, the tent was still standing, even partially buried. Why would experienced hikers flee a mild slide and strip themselves in the process? only to suffer crushing internal injuries far away. The physical scene simply does not fit the narrative. The hikers stumbled into a restricted zone where the Soviet military was testing a new, unconventional weapon. Perhaps a low-frequency sonic device, or an experimental blast. This explains the radiation on the clothing and the severe blunt force trauma with no external marks. They fled the tent to escape the initial shockwave or sound, only to be hit by a later blast or chemical agent. If the military was involved, their intervention was brutal. But why strip the victims? And why leave the bodies in place to be found, effectively exposing a secret program? The government did briefly test the victims' clothing for radiation, confirming the high levels, but then immediately classified the findings. This cover-up only deepened the mystery, suggesting the state knew more than it was willing to admit. The unusual terrain on Dead Mountain created a rare meteorological phenomenon. A Kármán vortex street, a series of cyclical wind vortices, could have generated ultra-low frequency sound waves or infrasound. Humans cannot hear infrasound, but it directly affects the inner ear and brain, triggering feelings of intense dread, panic, dizziness, and irrational fear. This theory explains the irrational flight. Driven by panic and nausea, they cut the tent, fled the mountain, and started stripping due to a paradoxical heat sensation caused by the fear. But how does infrasound account for the crushing internal chest and skull injuries? Infrasound can paralyze, but it cannot shatter ribs without leaving a mark. For 3 people to sustain such fatal blunt force trauma from an unseen, non-physical source remains almost impossible. The Dyatlov Pass has been re-examined, re-investigated, and reopened countless times. A definitive scientific explanation now leans towards a specific type of avalanche. But no single theory explains all the facts. The internal crushing forces, the missing tongue, the inexplicable radiation, the tent slashed from the inside. What force was powerful enough to break a human skull without leaving a single bruise? And what terrifying sight made 9 trained people tear apart their only shelter and run half-naked toward certain death? We may know how they died, but we still don't know what they were running from. And somewhere in the frozen silence of the Ural Mountains, the truth is still waiting.